Hey everybody, Modern Day James here again for another installation of the Foundation Patreon. And this month we're going to be covering lens lengths and lens distortions. I'll start us off by discussing what the general differences between types of lenses are. So let's imagine we have a subject, and in this case the subject is this square. If we have our camera placed very close to the subject, we're going to need what is called a wide-angle lens in order to capture its entirety. And the name wide angle is exactly what it's doing. The angle of photons that are reaching the lens are very sharp. When the camera is placed far away, we use a long lens to capture the entirety of the subject. You'll notice from this distance that the angle that the photons have to take in order to reach the lens is much shallower. I'm placing in some numbers here to indicate the focal length of the lens. Wide-angle lenses are typically on the lower end, whereas the long lenses might be around 200 millimeters and above. We can take a look at this same setup in 3 dimensions just so we have a better understanding of the principles. Notice that even when I'm using digital, I ghost over those lines the same way as you do in a traditional setup. Again, you can see that the angles at which the light must travel in order to interact with the lens becomes sharper and sharper the closer you are to the subject. We'll again place our long lens camera further back. You can see how much shallower the angles are from the lens to each vertice. The main visual difference that occurs from this is what I like to refer to as the rate of convergence of each parallel line. A wide-angle lens, which as the name indicates uses very strong angles, will have a much faster rate of convergence than that of the long lens. And the key relationship is that lens length is inversely related to the rate of convergence. So with these principles in mind, let's just create a few cubes so we can understand how they change with different lens lengths. I'm starting out with a very long lens, in which case parallel lines are visually parallel as well. Since the difference in the angles of light dissipates the further you are from the subject, parallel lines will appear more truly parallel with longer length lenses. Now I'm just gradually increasing the convergence, doing this step by step so that I can really develop my control of what type of lens I'm using. Now as my lens becomes a little bit shorter, we start to introduce some vertical convergence as well. And by vertical convergence, I mean that our verticals are no longer completely parallel and are converging towards a vanishing point beneath the page. As we head further and further into wide angle territory, I'm just gradually increasing the convergence. So now I'll take these principles and show how we can do vehicle sketches using two different types of lenses. This part is reminiscent of a vehicle sketching tutorial done by Dan Park here on the Foundation Patreon. What we'll be doing is taking a look at our vehicle, breaking it down into two-dimensional shapes, and then projecting those shapes into 3 dimensions and creating form. When it comes time to do the 3-dimensional forms, though, we'll be using different lenses for each blockout. I'm looking at an old Model T Ford and just breaking it down into simple shapes, not paying attention to any of the minor details like the doors, cut lines, mirrors. It'll be a lot easier for us to place these simple shapes in perspective than a very complex, detail-heavy car. Now I'm going to do my first blockout in a long length lens. Again, in this scenario, the camera's placed very far from our subject. Since we're using a long lens, the rate of convergence is very low. So again, all of the parallel lines will appear visually parallel as well. I'm trying to find that same angle as that last line. Again, just ghosting over to find that angle. I don't draw through as much as Scott Robertson. I find that it tends to clutter up the page quite a bit. But feel free to draw through if you want to. If you're comfortable drawing through already, you actually don't even need to include it on the page, because you can visualize it in your head. Now I'm trying to find that same angle back towards that right vanishing point. And to the best of my ability, I try to emulate that angle at the same. And all of those lines traveling away from the left vanishing point are pretty much entirely parallel. Now I'm placing in the covering over the tires. Repeat that shape on the left side there. Then my cat shows up, interrupts my filming, as he always does. Now I'm just measuring back down to the ground plane, extending that over to the right side, and now I'm going to the back wheel. Again, if you're uncomfortable with any of these principles, read up on it in Scott Robertson's How to Draw. There's a back trunk area. Platform for you to stand on. And the back covering of the back wheel. Here I'm just placing in ellipses for the wheels. If you do this a lot, you'll get more and more comfortable with placing in wheels with their proper ellipses. Although even if you do mess up, you can kind of work with it a bit. You'll find in the longer sketches that I do, even if I mess up an ellipse, I'll kind of keep it and just sort of work into it and add some of the more details, and it tends to look nice even if I've messed up the first ellipse. Now I'm just placing in cylinders for the headlights. And there's these really odd cylindrical shaped mirrors. I'm just placing those in. And now I'm going to repeat the same process, but use a wide angle lens. I start out by adding some curvature to my vertical lines, as you would see in a fisheye lens, which is essentially just a really extreme wide angle lens. Traveling away from the left vanishing point, another vertical, and now already notice the convergence on those two lines heading away from the left vanishing point. Going back towards the right vanishing point, really making sure to sell that heavy convergence. An important thing to note is that in a fisheye lens, there's both a top and bottom vanishing point. And so to the left of either of those, my vertical lines are going to be curving towards the left, and to the right of those, my vertical lines are going to be curving out towards the right. You can see that here, as this vertical line I just placed in was to the right of those vertical vanishing points. Connecting back towards the ground plane. And now ellipses for the wheels. If you're having trouble with those, again, I have to refer you back to Scott Robertson's How to Draw. It'll really help you with all those sorts of things. Now, if you wanted, you can continue placing in the final details, but I'm going to move on because I have a longer demo at the end. What I'm going to do now is try to do a few of these blockouts in a couple of different angles, just so we can get the hang of rotating these forms and placing them in different angles as well as with different camera lenses. I'm starting out with the long lenses. If you've seen my previous foundation video on rotating forms, you know that as the left vanishing point moves further outward, the right vanishing point moves further towards the center. And so that's dictating where I'm placing my left and right vanishing points. And if for some reason you haven't seen that one, feel free to check that out, or check my YouTube channel where I discuss that. I have a video specifically on rotation and camera lenses. But again, notice that since we're using a long lens, all of those lines heading towards the right vanishing point are almost entirely parallel, and all of the lines heading back towards the left are also entirely parallel. This wedge is here on a slant. Now I'm going to do another one. rotating the car a little bit towards us so that the front is facing us. Keep in mind that as the car turns towards us, we're going to see more and more of the front and less of the side. Again, just trying to keep those angles consistent. Make sure all the lines heading back to each vanishing point are parallel. Now I'm going to do another one, but looking at the car from the backside at a 3/4 view. It's good to play with this too. You can really get a sense of all the different angles that you can choose. And before you get committed to a full sketch, it's nice to do this just so you can see what sorts of angles you can put the car in. And there's my cat again. I don't really need to be including all these details, but I'm just doing it for the sake of the demonstration. Now I'm placing in another front view where the camera's looking down. You'll see when I do the full length demonstration after that having these blackouts really makes the whole drawing a lot easier. And in fact, this is really the hardest part of the drawing. The degree on those ellipses of the wheels is really shallow at this angle because we're looking straight on, or almost straight on. The more of the side of the car we see, the wider the degree of that ellipse is going to be. Now let's go into the world of wide-angle lenses, which I've conveniently drawn off the screen, and via the power of editing have brought it back onto the screen. I'm starting with those vertical lines, which I'm rounding out, as you would see in a fisheye. The lines traveling away from my left vanishing point are curving. The closer we get towards that left vanishing point, the more and more curved those lines will be. I actually cover fisheye lens perspective in one of my early videos if you want to check that out as well. The further away from the horizon line we move, the more and more curved these horizontal lines are going to be. So you see as we move further away, those horizontal lines get more and more curved. Again, my vertical line's really curved. Since the vertical vanishing points are in between these two lines, the one on the left curves outwards to the left, and the one on the right curves outwards to the right. So in this angle, what's happening is we have a fisheye lens, and we're looking down on the top of this, onto the top of this car, and it's sort of getting this really wacky, wonky perspective that gets smaller and smaller towards the ground plane. takes a little bit to get used to curving your vertical lines. But once you do, you can really make these interesting perspectives. I think this one's curving just a little bit too much, but so sorry about that. In this case, since the entirety of the car is to the left of the vertical vanishing points, all my vertical lines are curving out towards the left. Just want to make note of that. So now let's do a finished sketch using these principles. I actually wanted to do this demonstration traditionally, but I didn't have it set up at the time, and I did the demonstration first, so sorry about that. But it's essentially the same exact thing. It might just be a little bit harder to see because you can't see my pen strokes as well. I'm starting here by blocking out a primitive form captured with a long lens. At the time of filming, I'm living in New York City, so I was inspired by some New York City street sweepers. And all of the parking tickets that are associated with them. Just keep in mind that rate of convergence being pretty low, especially when you use that long lens length. I'm not really indicating any details. Again, I don't draw through as much as Scott Robertson, so you'll see me start to curve things out. You can do that using full guidelines the way that he does, but since I don't use working drawings and just go directly, I tend to try to avoid using too many guidelines. But that's totally up to you. If you're using ballpoint pen, you can do that. At least with ballpoint pen, you have control of opacity, so your guidelines and working lines don't show up as much. Anytime you introduce new forms, just try to keep them as simple as possible. Don't add too much detail into it. We'll go back into all of this afterwards and add the minor details. Now these lines are connecting back to the ground plane. That way I can see how my car is connected to the ground and how far it is from the ground. That'll help me place in the wheels. I usually do my wheels by first placing in an ellipse, then I do a center line, and then I place in my other ellipses for the rim. Here I'm drawing through a little bit. Now I'm starting to block in the actual sweeper part of the street sweeper. Sorry, I tend to move around a little bit. I was blocking in the street sweeper and then I just placed in the rim above the wheel. It's a bit of my ADD coming out. Now I'm going to place in the rim for the tires, or for the front tire. Here's where I start adding in the minor details. Some of these lights, some of the cut lines on the windshield, the windows. And if you have pen sensitivity, or if you have pressure sensitivity on, you can thicken up your line weight a bit. I move my cursor around a lot because I'm thinking about what to do next. A lot of times it's think first and then act, rather than if you're doing a loose sketch, sometimes you're going based on intuition. A sketch like this is pretty tight and mechanical, so you just want to think before you make your marks. And if you're working digitally, you can kind of use the actual mark as a ghosting. Normally, if I'm doing it traditionally, I'll ghost over first, but sometimes digitally I'll just make the mark and then undo it. I just drew in some of the bolts and now the lettering on the front of the car. Now I'm placing in the cut lines on the side door. Anytime I do a cut line, I'll usually do two lines where I'll do one for the cast shadow and then another for the contour line of the next seam. Now I'm drawing in the mirrors. Now I'm thickening up the line weight on those mirrors just to show that they're in front. As you thicken up a lot of the lines, your eyes will start to focus on those rather than the working drawing underneath, or any of the guidelines. Now I'm drawing in some decals that are on the front. Those heavy dark areas really help sell some of the contrast, and I find those very visually appealing. There's a lot of details here underneath the car there. A lot of wires and stuff running through that. It's probably best not to focus too much on it. Now I'm building out the form for the light that sits on top of the truck. Essentially a cone shape with the top cut off. Any of these bottom facing lines, I'm putting in a pretty heavy line weight because they're most likely in shadow. Now I'm creating that bottom ellipse for the street sweeper, hatching just to show some texture and lighting. Now I'm hatching that tire just to show that it's curved and that it's in shadow. And now I'm just adding in really heavy dark marks for the cast shadows. I'm really into the way that Sid Mead does his vehicle sketches, and he uses these very heavy, dark cast shadows in a lot of his work. I'm just putting in minor details like the lettering, the decals, and all of that. Some bolts. Once I'm happy with the sketch, I go in with some digital Copic markers. And again, all these techniques you can do traditionally. This isn't a Copic marker rendering tutorial, so I'm not really going to go into it too much, but you can just take a look at how I do it in time-lapse. Alright, I hope you're still with me. I'm not used to making these super long videos. But now we're gonna go for the wide angle lens. Notice that I'm already starting with those curved vertical lines, and the rate of convergence is so much faster than it was previously. Drawing through a little bit there. We're going to have essentially all of the same steps again, just starting with our block out and then adding in the final details afterwards. Again, the big difference is that really fast rate of convergence and those vertical convergence lines. And now that my blockout's done, I'm going to start adding in those final details and do those in a little bit of a heavier line weight. Alright everybody, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this month's installment of the Foundation Patreon. If you want more content from me, you can head over to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/moderndayjames. And if you're interested in learning from me in person, consider taking one of my courses at the Brainstorm School in Burbank, California. And thank you so much for your continued support of the Foundation Group. Take care, everybody.